On behalf of the organizers, welcome to the series of virtual thematic fora presented by the North American Human Development Network, or REDHAN, for its abbreviation in Spanish. REDHAN is a consortium of 8 universities and research centers in Mexico and Arizona focused on developing research and academic collaborations and providing a venue to showcase scholarship on the issues impacting human development in the transborder region. The forum that will be presented today is on food and water security in the transborder region, a perennial topic for an arid region such as the Sonoran Desert, but one that has become more urgent under the stresses placed on water resources and arable land by climate change, urbanization, and population growth. Each of our panelists today will make a 15-minute presentation on their topics, and we'll set aside 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the panel for questions and final remarks from our panelists. So to make sure we have the time needed to make the presentations, we'll go ahead and jump in, and I will introduce each of the speakers as we introduce their presentations. So our first speaker today is Dr. Sharon Collins. She is the director of the Arizona Institute of Resilience here at the University of Arizona. And her presentation will be on the summary of a report on the future of agriculture and food production in a drying climate. Dr. Sharon Collins directs the Arizona Institute for Resilience at the University of Arizona, which is an interdisciplinary institute housing 15 centers and programs focused on developing tools and solutions to promote environmental and societal resilience in response to environmental change. Dr. Collins is a landscape ecologist whose interdisciplinary research focuses on the consequences of environmental change for species and ecosystems, and she formerly served as professor and chair of the Environmental Studies Department at the University of Colorado, and as chief scientist and observatory director for the National Science Foundation-funded National Ecological Observatory Network, or NEON, and as the vice president for public affairs for the Ecological Society of America, or ESA. Dr. Collins, we're very happy to have you with us today and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you all for attending. So today I'd like to review the findings of a report that I was involved in. That's a report of the Presidential Advisory Commission on the Future of Agriculture and Food Production in a Drying Climate. So a very long title, but this is a commission that the president appointed about 1 year ago, and we worked for about 6 months together to develop a set of analyses and recommendations regarding agriculture and food production in a drying climate. So today I'd like to just go through the highlights of that report and then talk about how we might forge partnerships with folks in this consortium to advance some of these research questions. So the commission was established in December 2022. It was co-chaired by Professors Laura Condon and Joaquin Ruiz here at the University of Arizona. And we were tasked by President Robert Robbins with recommending steps that the University of Arizona could take to position the state of Arizona as a global leader in climate resilient, sustainable agricultural and food production technology and practices. So we went on a series of listening sessions with food producers, with faculty, staff, and a variety of external community members and stakeholders within the desert agriculture industry to find out what people found to be the most immediate threats to food and agriculture production in a drying climate and what some of the solutions might be. So this is just a quick summary of the threats that we identified from our conversations with a variety of stakeholders. Essentially, we're trying to grow food with less water in a climate. And that is, there's a reduced availability and increased competition for water here in Arizona. And the hotter climate and less water can result in declines in soil quality, in biodiversity, and in product yield and quality. There are also socioeconomic and cultural concerns that are threats to growing food and agriculture in a drying climate, primarily related to loss of the agricultural land, the workforce, and communities that have been reliant for many generations on agricultural production. In terms of thinking about how we address and adapt to these threats, we identified some policies that are siloed and inflexible that relate to how we use and allocate water, and a lack of systems thinking about the whole food system, from production to processing to transportation to consumption, and the importance of linking all those aspects of the food system, and impediments related to research and development investment. So these were the primary threats that we identified. We asked ourselves, why is the University of Arizona in a position to begin to galvanize research and education and outreach around solutions? And we identified these areas of that support the University of Arizona as a good place to do this. Our responsibility as a land grant institution, the fact that we have cooperative extension offices in all 15 counties in Arizona and in 5 native nations, a lot of expertise across the University of Arizona in water, in agriculture, and in food production, programs that connect business and professional experts, so in terms of thinking about technology and innovation. We have facilities that foster collaboration, and we have been competitive for large grants and philanthropic investment that could fuel much of the research, education, and outreach that we identified. We saw also opportunities for global leadership, given that Arizona and Sonora, Mexico are 2 examples of places that are dry and becoming more dry, and can share situations with other places around the world. So we think there's an opportunity to produce and provide research-based solutions, to develop future leaders, thinkers, and doers, and to engage directly with communities, organizations, institutions to jointly arrive at solutions that are feasible and implementable. We also think there's an opportunity to spearhead efforts to ensure Arizona's resilience to future climate, economic, and policy shocks within the food and agricultural production sector. So we came up with 5 recommendations, and I'll just briefly go through those. One of the first recommendations that we came up with was to create a new institute for sustainable food, water, and agriculture systems here at the University of Arizona, with the purpose to really look at the systems level challenges. So I talked about the importance of linking food production with processing, transportation, consumption, all throughout the food system. And so we think that this institute could address those systems level challenges, specifically in arid lands, and that we could leverage the existing capacity and partnerships both here at the University of Arizona, across the state of Arizona, and with other partners across the world to create interdisciplinary solutions. The goals of this institute would be to build partnerships such as the one that we're talking about today, to accelerate research, co-develop solutions, and to focus on developing workforce and connection with farmers and consumers and policymakers. Our second recommendation was more specific than a broad institute for sustainable food, ag, and water, was to create a center specifically focused on soil health because of the fundamental basis of soil as the fundamental basis of soil for our food systems. So this would bring together research capacity across the campus, and again, with partners across other institutions to address research and development goals around soil health and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Another purpose of this center would be to bring together agricultural producers into the co-design and decision-making structure of the center, to look at scaling statewide soil health assessments and implementation plans, and provide science to support policymaking around practices related to soil health. We also found an opportunity to create technology and innovation hubs at existing agricultural centers within the state of Arizona, as well as Biosphere 2. And the purpose of this would be to use these opportunities to accelerate technological development so that we could reduce the time gap between the generation of ideas and the implementation and adoption of new technologies and innovations. So at these sites, we would be able to use existing farm technology and laboratory infrastructure to begin to test and innovate around some of these solutions and innovative technologies, and also to use these opportunities to train producers, researchers, and technologists. This fourth recommendation is really critical within the state of Arizona, and that relates to expanding partnerships with tribal agriculture. Much, if not most, of the agriculture in Arizona happens on tribal lands. And so we believe that there's an opportunity to expand and deepen the trust and reciprocal relationships with Native nations by participating in tribal consultation, listening to practices and communities, and learning from and contributing to those farming methods that have been practiced for millennia on arid lands. And our fifth recommendation was really relevant to this conversation, which is to establish new and strengthen existing collaborations with institutions in arid regions around the world. And obviously, those of you who are participating today, there's an opportunity for partnerships. We recommended that these partnerships could be with international institutions on water, agriculture, and food sustainability. As I said, strengthen existing relationships and build new ones with partners in places like Mexico, Israel, Australia, Morocco, France, and UAE. And I know my colleague, Greg Barron-Gafford, might speak a little bit about some of this work. And then these partnership development activities also align with our strategic plan, which is to expand our reach in into global projects. So those are the recommendations that we put forward in this report. We're happy to share the report with you. I think there's a link that will be made available in this recording. And so I appreciate your time and attention, and happy to answer questions after our last speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I mean, that is, kind of groundbreaking work, a lot of interesting aspects to the, to the recommendations of the report, especially looking at taking a systems approach and looking at not just the production of food, but also the distribution and processing of food that certainly happens in this region. And taking, the approach of having the science inform public policy, which is something I know that the group that's hosting this webinar, Redhan, has been working on for quite some time across a number of issues for human development. So that's refreshing as well. And then thirdly, I think there's a huge parallel with, engagement with the Native nations here in Arizona and with the situation in Sonora and other parts of northern Mexico, as well as agriculture takes place either on or adjacent to lands of the First Nations in Sonora. So I think there's a lot to talk about here towards the end of the presentation. Thank you so much, Sharon. And we will move on now to our second presenter, who is Dr. America Lutzley from el Colegio de Sonora. And she is going to share with us Agua sin pasaporte, la seguridad hídrica y alimentaria en la región transfronteriza México-Estados Unidos, water without a passport, water and food security in the Mexico-U.S. transborder region. And just a little bit of background on Dr. Lutzley. She is the General Academic Director and a Professor Researcher at the Center for Studies on Development at el Colegio de Sonora in Hermosillo, Mexico. She has a PhD in Arid Lands Resource Sciences with a minor in Global Change from the University of Arizona and a master's degree in Social Sciences with a concentration in Public Affairs from el Colegio de Sonora. She's a member of the Mexican National System of Researchers, the SNI, Level 1, and she's also a recognized professor by the Ministry of Education's PRODEP program. She has published more than 30 articles and chapters in English and Spanish, in indexed and peer-reviewed publications, and her research focuses on the dynamics and problems of human adaptation to climate change, water security management, and mining and agrarian extractivism. She analyzes these aspects from socio-ecological systems approaches, political ecology, feminist political ecology, and institutions and public management. We're honored to have you with us today, America. We look forward to your presentation.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas. Yo preparé mi presentación en inglés, pero voy a hablar en español en un intento por to cover all the fronts. So, muchas gracias a Justin por esta amable invitación. Me da muchísimo gusto compartir estos momentos con colegas conocidos, con colegas por conocer, y yo les voy a hablar una serie de ideas que nos lleven a reflexionar sobre las necesidades a las que nos están empujando los nuevos retos de globalización socioeconómica, urbanización y cambio climático en la región que compartimos en el noroeste de México y el sureste de Estados Unidos. Y vamos a ver por qué yo llamo al agua sin pasaporte, agua que se mueve a través de fronteras, implicando que toda movilización de productos, de personas, de servicios, implica también una movilización de agua que tenemos que contabilizar. Muy bien. Bueno, ustedes saben que la región transfronteriza México-Estados Unidos es una muy compleja. Son más de 3,000 kilómetros del extremo de las ciudades hermanas de Tijuana-San Diego al extremo Brownsville-Matamoros. Son 10 estados fronterizos que suman en total más de 100 millones de personas en ambos lados de la frontera. Y de manera muy importante, una cosa que define geográfica y políticamente el territorio para nosotros son dos grandes ríos. El río Colorado en el oeste y el río Grande o río Bravo en el este. Entonces, el río Colorado, que es uno de los más icónicos e importantes del suroeste de Estados Unidos, se extiende más de 2,300 kilómetros desde las montañas rocosas en Estados Unidos hacia el suroeste, atraviesa el Gran Cañón y desemboca en el Golfo de California, aquí en México. Hace 60 años que no lo hace, a excepción de unos pocos flujos ambientales que han sido liberados, ¿no?, en los años pasados, gracias a las minutas que existen en la colaboración en el International Boundary and Water Commission, la IBWC en Estados Unidos. Pero básicamente el río Colorado es una arteria principal para nuestra región. Se ha enfrentado en estos últimos 20 años a una de las sequías más profundas de las que se tiene registro históricamente, pero eso no ha prevenido el hecho de que nos une en esa vía de agua a más de 40 millones de personas, 11 tribus nativas o pueblos originarios, más tribus nativas que esas considerando toda la región, 11 parques nacionales en Estados Unidos y también una reserva de la biosfera aquí del lado mexicano, ¿no? Una parte importante de las asignaciones del agua del río Colorado son para producción agropecuaria, básicamente. Alrededor del 80% de toda el agua de uso humano que proviene del río Colorado se utiliza para irrigar. Y estas zonas irrigables representan alrededor del 15% de todas las zonas agrícolas de Estados Unidos y un porcentaje pues mucho menor que también se riega del lado mexicano a través del Valle de Mexicali y el distrito de riego que comparten Mexicali y San Luis Río Colorado, que de ahí obtiene su nombre. Del lado norteamericano, el Valle Imperial al sur de California es uno de los principales productores de verduras verdes, de vegetales verdes para Estados Unidos, pero también para todo el mundo. Esto es algo muy importante para la región porque hay un movimiento de agua virtual, que ahorita vamos a definir ese concepto, un movimiento de agua a través de la exportación de los productos agropecuarios que ocurre de zonas áridas y semiáridas del noroeste de México y del suroeste de Estados Unidos a nivel regional, pero también hacia afuera, hacia otros continentes incluso. Entonces, esta zona de la parte baja de la cuenca del río Colorado representa un 90% de la producción de vegetales verdes, de hoja verde para Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, estas frutas, verduras, tanto del lado estadounidense como del lado mexicano, que se vuelven commodities para un mercado internacional, están implicando que nosotros somos de ciertos exportadores de agua, ¿no? Considerando la sequía que ha existido durante las últimas décadas y el hecho de que ha bajado progresivamente el nivel de las principales presas del sistema del río Colorado, pues las ciudades que están alrededor, los estados que están alrededor, incluyendo incluso México con la parte norte de Baja California, Tijuana, Mexicali, pero también Los Ángeles, Phoenix, Tucson, pues se han enfrentado a una serie de restricciones muy importantes en materia de cómo se accede al agua que se requiere para producción y también para las ciudades de manera muy importante. Ahora bien, esta producción muy importante pues representa también empleos, es uno de los motores de crecimiento en esta parte del mundo, que además es árida y semiárida, pero nos va empujando la situación climática y combinado esto con una situación de urbanización y de crecimiento poblacional muy acelerado en la región, hacia la consideración de nuevos paradigmas cognitivos en la forma en que concebimos el territorio y en la forma en que concebimos nuestros recursos hídricos. Entonces, yo lo que les quiero presentar en esta ocasión no es meramente un asunto de conceptos académicos para entender la situación o de enfatizar el valor de los datos científicos. Obviamente los datos científicos son valiosos y los necesitamos, pero estamos en una situación completamente nueva que no habíamos conocido en época moderna y que nos obliga a empujar nuestros paradigmas de acción un poco más adelante. Los conceptos clave con los que usualmente hemos entendido la situación que ocurre en toda la frontera árida entre México y Estados Unidos, pero particularmente la zona noroeste de México, suroeste de Estados Unidos, pues se puede iluminar gracias a una serie de conceptos. Aquí nosotros estamos hablando de water security, food security, seguridad hídrica, seguridad alimentaria, que se refiere a contar con esos elementos, alimentos como agua, en cada diferencias las definiciones. Pero hay otros conceptos que han surgido en últimos años y que nos han permitido iluminar partes del sistema socioecológico, hídrico, incluso que compartimos entre los dos países. Uno de ellos es el Water, Food Energy Nexus, que ahorita también se va a abordar un poco más con el tema de agrofotovoltaicos del compañero Greg Barron. Pero también está el otro concepto de Virtual Water y Water Footprint, el agua virtual, la huella hídrica, que en este caso yo me quiero referir a estos últimos dos porque son muy importantes para esta región. El agua virtual y la huella hídrica se refieren al hecho de que todo servicio, todo producto tiene, desde que se concibe, se diseña o se fabrica, hasta que llega a las manos del consumidor y se desecha, agua implicada en todo el proceso. En el caso de frutas y verduras eso es todavía más evidente porque usamos una gran cantidad de agua para producirlas. El nexo de agua, alimentos, energía también es importante para esta región porque nos habla de los trade-offs o de los intercambios de costos cruzados entre diferentes sectores usuarios que también usan agua. Pero mi mensaje, creo yo, más importante en este sentido es, estos son conceptos técnicos y los requerimos para entender la situación y nos pueden iluminar partes importantes de lo que es la situación hídrica del Colorado, sobre todo en los últimos 20 años, pero más ampliamente la situación hídrica de la relación binacional entre México y Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, como tal, podemos ser insuficientes para entender la situación. En términos de agua virtual y de movimiento de agua contenido en los productos agropecuarios en la frontera entre México y Estados Unidos, podemos decir que el norte árido de México exporta agua en forma de alimentos, pero su principal mercado es Estados Unidos. Eso es muy importante porque el agua se mueve, pero se mueve regionalmente. Entonces, eso nos ofrece ahí un elemento para controlar un poco la gestión. Los principales productos que se han exportado en materia agropecuaria de México a Estados Unidos hasta 2022 son frutas, vegetales, cerveza, tequila, aguacates. Esto ha cambiado progresivamente. Antes la carne también ocupaba un lugar central, pero ha ido disminuyendo frente a otros bienes medianamente procesados. También el 80% de todas las exportaciones de los estados del norte de México, que son estados áridos, se dirigen hacia Estados Unidos. Muchas de las áreas de irrigación, las granjas que utilizan agua para la producción agropecuaria, lo hacen de fuentes subterráneas. Entonces, ocurre similar del lado suroeste de Estados Unidos, sobre todo en Arizona o cuando no hay suficiente agua del río Colorado, y esto le agrega una capa de dificultad mayor a la gestión hídrica porque es agua que no podemos ver, aunque sí la estamos utilizando para producir. Del lado norteamericano hay una situación similar. En términos de agua virtual, el agua también se mueve sin pasaporte, pero va hacia el sur. Las exportaciones agrícolas de Estados Unidos a México fueron equivalentes a 20 billones de dólares en 2018 y México se ha mantenido como el segundo socio comercial más importante de Estados Unidos en materia agropecuaria, y las exportaciones de todos los estados del sur de Estados Unidos también tienen México como su primer destino. ¿Qué recibimos los mexicanos? Y esto ha generado mucha discusión aquí en México. Recibimos el maíz, recibimos soya, productos lácteos, puerco, productos de pollo o de aves, productos cárnicos y trigo. Entonces, la importancia que esto nos refleja nos lleva a la siguiente pregunta. ¿Cómo podemos garantizar la seguridad hídrica y alimentaria local de esta zona altamente interconectada, caracterizada por los efectos fuertes de cambio climático, por la presencia de agronegocios de gran escala y por esta interdependencia económica y cultural tan fuerte que existe entre ambas regiones, o bueno, en esta gran región? ¿Cómo podemos garantizar en medio de todo ese contexto, sabiendo que mientras se produce alimento con agua muy escasa, incluso agua fósil a veces cuando viene de fuentes subterráneas, en comunidades que por ellas mismas no tienen seguridad hídrica y alimentaria? Es una contradicción propia de esta región que nos hace preguntarnos si de casualidad no habremos llegado ya a una trampa regional. ¿Qué es esto? Que la forma en que está estructurada nuestra economía entre México y Estados Unidos, y podríamos incluir también a Canadá, pero vamos a hablar de nosotros dos ahorita, entre México y Estados Unidos, con esta forma de estructuración económica, con este perfil agroalimentario, con esta forma de uso de recursos, con un río Colorado que está ahorita en uno de sus peores estados, ¿qué posibilidades reales tenemos de que este esquema sea lo suficientemente flexible para acomodar el cambio y para permitirnos adaptarnos? Aquí es donde creo yo que conceptos más del lado ético que del lado científico van a hacer falta, y esto es lo importante del mensaje. Más allá de pensar en los mejores conceptos para entender holísticamente la situación, los mejores modelos heurísticos, cognitivos, para gestionar nuestra agua, los mejores instrumentos de política pública tienen que contener a fuercitas, sí o sí, un imperativo ético que nos permita concebir socialmente el agua no como un insumo económico, como un insumo de producción, no solamente como eso, sino en un sentido más holístico como un activo socioecológico. Es decir, reconocerle en la gestión, en el estudio académico y en la intervención todas las dimensiones sociales, culturales, incluso de visión tradicional que tiene el agua, además de los parámetros meramente técnicos o científicos. Aquí también quiero hablar de una situación que acá en México, en Sonora sobre todo, se ha estado escuchando mucho. Pues varios estados, sobre todo la parte sur de la cuenca del río Colorado, se han enfrentado a estas restricciones muy severas en materia de uso de agua, tanto en la agricultura como en las ciudades, como en los diferentes sectores. Uno de los planes que salió en Arizona entre 2021 y 2022 fue la construcción de una planta desalinizadora en el Golfo de California. Hubo comunicación entre los gobiernos, el gobierno del estado de Sonora dijo, yo vuelvo a hablar con la empresa israelí, Arizona sigue empujando el proyecto, los sonorenses no hemos visto ningún manifiesto de impacto ambiental, entonces se está preparando un terreno un poco conflictivo si esto sigue avanzando. Y hay muchas ideas cruzadas sobre cómo debemos enfrentar la sequía del Colorado desde el punto de vista de cada estado que esté involucrado. Los 7 estados de Estados Unidos y los 2 estados que estamos en México, ¿no? Algunos dicen, los ambientalistas, que Arizona debería de cuidar mejor la forma en que usa sus recursos, que debería cuestionarse incluso la ciudad de Phoenix, que es para quien va el agua, si necesita seguir construyendo casas en el desierto, o si de verdad esta es una opción. Por otra parte, también sectores empresariales han empezado a discutir que pues es una gran economía tener canchas de golf, que es una buena inversión del agua y que además no usan tanta porque es agua reclaimed water, es agua de reuso, que no representaría un gran problema en términos del abasto de agua potable disponible para el estado. Es aquí justamente, en este tipo de problemas, donde los científicos tenemos que dar cabida a las cuestiones más de fondo de ética humana. Hay un modelo que se llama Nueva Economía del Agua, que plantea cómo en la gestión del agua nos movemos de la parte expansionista, que se enfoca en el supply, en el abasto, hacia una parte de gestión del territorio y de la conservación, que implica una ética ecológica mucho más fuerte que la que usualmente tenemos los estados, sobre todo en esta región del mundo, para pensar en nuestros recursos hídricos. Aquí les puse nomás una idea de cómo se usa el agua en las principales ciudades de la región, pero frente a cambio climático, frente a urbanización progresiva y a crecimiento económico en los términos de la nueva economía global, nos vamos a tener que empezar a hacer preguntas muy difíciles. Y estas preguntas tienen que ser el disparador de las conversaciones. ¿Para qué usamos el agua? ¿Quién la posee? ¿Cómo se maneja? ¿Cómo es valorada el agua? Si es valorada solo en términos económicos o hay un valor intrínseco en el agua. ¿Cómo se construye socialmente el agua? ¿Por qué son preguntas difíciles? Porque nos llevan a cuestionarnos si un proyecto, como por ejemplo la planta desaladora, va a implicar una decisión entre riego mi jardín, juego golf o conservo el Alto Golfo de California de cualquier impacto ambiental potencial, o dejo de producir comida en alguna de las de subsistencia, es decir, los trade-offs entre niveles, entre sectores y entre los dos países. Y esa relación es muy difícil, es el tipo de preguntas que no nos queremos hacer como científicos, pero el cambio climático nos va a empujar a tenerlas que hacer, y entonces la invitación es a contar con esos principios discutidos, acordados entre ambas partes. Esta fotografía me gusta mucho, esta fotografía yo la uso así como para decir, espérense, no nos vamos a pelear, no va a haber conflicto ahora que estamos en una crisis hídrica. En 2012 un establecimiento de Nogales, Sonora se estaba quemando y bomberos de Nogales, Arizona estaban mandando agua a través de la frontera para ayudarles a apagar el incendio. Entonces, Arizona y Sonora en particular, pero también más generalmente el suroeste de Estados Unidos y el noroeste de México, tienen una larga historia de colaboraciones. Se va hacia 1922 con el Colorado Compact, pero luego hacia 1944, donde se reafirman estas relaciones. Luego tenemos el Acuerdo de la Paz de los 80s, luego tenemos las distintas minutas que nos han llevado hacia adelante estos últimos años. Entonces, creo yo que estamos en un punto crítico en términos de agua, de cómo la gestionamos, de cómo garantizamos la seguridad hídrica de toda la zona, y en donde tenemos que empezar a pensar como región en vez de como estado o como ciudad. Por mi parte, eso es todo. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, América. Excelente, excelente presentación. Realmente lo de agua virtual es una nueva paradigma para muchos. Pensar de que agua cruce la frontera todos los días, pero en distintas formas, en distintos productos. Eso es importantísimo. Y la idea de pensar bueno, la relación de la producción agrícola a nivel comercial, industrial, en muchos casos, con relación a bueno, la soberanía de los territorios de las primeras naciones. Estoy pensando, yo creo que el ejemplo más importante es lo de Río Yaqui, el valle de Río Yaqui en Sonora, donde ha habido tensión por muchos años, pero yo creo que hasta ahora están llegando a una solución. Son temas universales que también de este lado de la frontera lo sentimos, así que te agradezco mucho la presentación. E igual recalcamos la importancia de que la ciencia vaya a informar la formulación de políticas públicas con sentido, con una base en la sustentabilidad a largo plazo para la gente que vive en esta región y no solo para la producción comercial. Muchas gracias, América. So I'm going to switch back to English and introduce our third speaker. Dr. Greg Barron-Gafford, who is going to present agrivoltaics, a tool towards food, water, and energy security despite a warmer and drier world. Dr. Greg Barron-Gafford is a biogeographer and earth system scientist who has been building the field of agrivoltaics. Greg began this work in southern Arizona to study the benefits across the food, water, energy, water nexus, and over the years has developed a national and international program connecting with researchers and rural community leaders across the American Southwest, Mexico, Kenya, Tanzania, and Israel. Agrivoltaics is an effort to develop science-based solutions to help people adapt to the increasing pressures that come from a changing climate. So I think this is a nice way to kind of close the discussion today, and we look at a possible solution that deals with the stresses that arable land is coming under and helps reduce the use of water. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, my screen blipped out there right at the most inopportune time. So thank you for the opportunity to follow Dr. Collins and Dr. America. I was able to be reminded of this cross-disciplinary and cross-border work that is so important to both sides, thinking about our futures in terms of food security, water security, and we're adding in this last talk the dimension of energy security. So I'm Greg Barron-Gafford, a professor here in the School of Geography, Development, and the Environment at the University of Arizona, but I always like to highlight the size of our team that it takes to do interdisciplinary work, and especially when talking with other universities about the opportunity for engagement with undergraduate and graduate students. All of the names here in orange are graduate students, and all the names in purple are some of our undergraduate assistants who support the other postdocs and faculty on this project. So more broadly, what is agrivoltaics, this tool that we're talking about? It literally is the mashup of the word agriculture and photovoltaics into one, where photovoltaics represents renewable energy production from solar panels. And in talking about this work, we really try to distill it to the most common language. Even in this case, you can see in this example, working with school children, anywhere from kindergarten in their first years up to high school seniors before coming to the university. And in talking with some of them, they said, oh, I get it. You're a farm that harvests the sun twice. And that's exactly what agrivoltaics is, balancing this potential for mitigating this massive resource we have in solar energy between food production and energy production. But why do this? You can see this is a picture of one of our research sites here. We're growing cut flowers to support more than direct food access to humans. But we found that agrivoltaics can help us across this food, energy, and water spectrum right at this nexus point, because it helps us adapt our food system to survive through periods of drought and temperature stress. Those being the two major drivers from the climate that suppress our food production because of the environmental stressors that food plants represent. By being in this shade of the solar, we just barely decrease the temperature enough that you can make it a more hospitable environment. We're improving energy production from renewable sources, and I want to share why. This is truly the interdisciplinary nature. I tend to work on the plant and water side of understanding our food systems, but it's also important to understand what is limiting our future renewable energy production. This is actually a graphic that shows you the efficiency of solar panels goes down linearly with temperature. And you can see that beyond about 25 degrees Celsius, or about 77 degrees Fahrenheit, renewable energy from photovoltaics declines with increasing temperature. And given that that is our forecast, how can we improve renewable energy production? Well, we're simply locating these plants you see in the foreground in and around those solar arrays, because the natural process of transpiration, water loss from these plants, is substantial enough that it can actually cool down the solar panels overhead. So it turns into this synergistic feedback within this system. And finally, to follow on what America was just talking about with water, we're trying to ease our dependence on irrigation by concentrating rain-fed water from rainstorms off of these panels into the growing spaces. But even more than that, by introducing shade from the solar array, either over the panels directly or over the soil in between these rows, we reduce the amount of evaporative loss of that water. I'm going to illustrate that in a few graphics and illustrations. So shades within this agrivoltaic system is causing not just a marginal, but a significant savings in our irrigation, because the microclimate is creating less evaporation. So in this graphic here, we're looking at pulses of soil moisture from an irrigation system every couple of days. Agrivoltaics, because frankly it's cooler in the shade, and the red lines represent the full sun traditional growing conditions. And what you can see in terms of water, in terms of a solution here, the soil moisture levels in this agrivoltaic system, so the blue line after 2 days before the next rain event, had dropped down to the point after 2 days again that the full sun condition had dropped to after only 2 to 3 hours. We're talking about orders of magnitude longer residency of that soil moisture in the soil there to help the plants live and thrive through our hot, dry conditions that we have across our borderlands. But just how much water can we save with this agrivoltaics approach is some of the work that we're doing now by developing precision irrigation systems that only deliver water when we have our plants drop below certain soil moisture thresholds. So we can ultimately calculate just how much water can we cut back. Because at this point, we've done an experiment where we've cut back water in our agrivoltaics treatment by about 50%. So cutting back half of the water, and we're only seeing marginal and sometimes no reductions in yield, which tells us we can cut back water use by more than half in these systems. But it also helps us to think, given water cuts and water shortages, could agrivoltaics actually allow for food production despite a drying world? So when we try to think about conflicts between water use, can actually the introduction of renewable energy in the form of agrivoltaics create a more sustainable food system? And I know some of you may be thinking, don't plants require sunlight to grow? Isn't that a basic principle of agriculture? Well, I wanted to share this graphic because it does get right at that point. The photosynthesis of plants does increase when you give them more light, but they tend to flatten out. At some point, they can do no more photosynthesis. They saturate. And if you give them too much light, they even start to do more poorly. It's just too much for them. But in case you're not sure where we fall on this line, I can tell you that you're right. Photosynthesis rates increase with more light up to that certain point. And this full sun represents just where we are out in our transborder regions for the most part in terms of full sun conditions. You can see that we're well beyond that saturation point. Okay, so how shady is it in a solar array? We're way down here near that saturation point. And so what this means is we have lots of room to play in our design of agrivoltaic systems, such as in this case, you could have cut back 66% of the light, given it to the solar canopy overhead, and barely, if at all, influenced rates of photosynthesis. And I think it's those kinds of clues that we can take from nature that can help us derive new solutions for dealing with our water, food, and energy crisis. And these things get even exaggerated when you talk about our future climate scenarios. When air temperature and relative humidity or soil moisture become more limiting, this relationship starts to collapse first at those higher light extremes, such that that saturation point holds, which means under future climate change scenarios, it's okay to be operating at this shady point that we are now. So let me give you a quick refresher on photosynthesis to help explain a little bit more about these global benefits from this system. You know, on the left, we see plants growing in the full sun environment. On the right, plants growing under the shade of a solar panel. And in the morning time, when it's the best time for us to be out in the sun, plants are doing plenty of photosynthesis. They actually appreciate being in the sun. And because they're opening their little pores to let carbon dioxide in, water is escaping. And this trade-off that plants have to do in terms of their desire to keep water means that there's this balance between photosynthesis and transpiration. So now think about, like, as we move throughout the day, plants are doing transpiration, this natural process of water loss that is often just going out into the atmosphere. But there's also a lot more water loss from evaporation. Every time we turn on our irrigation to keep our crops alive and healthy in the morning, we lose that water throughout the day, and not just to the plants, but to that atmosphere. So that throughout the day, that soil moisture is depleted such that there's less, represented here by this less of a blue underground pool of water for those plants to function. And so their water use, their transpirational water loss becomes another limiting factor. And if you remember from this graphic, if plants can't lose water, then they close their pores, and they become cerrado. You can no longer let carbon dioxide in, which means you've shut off photosynthesis. And so this is the process that plants are balancing throughout the day. And you can see from this graphic how transpiration can still happen in our agrivoltaic setting because we've kept that water that we've spent so much energy to get to our farms to still do that work. So again, air temperatures are lower in an agrivoltaic system. That water loss in a natural system is just burning off to the atmosphere, where it's staying in this area around the plants, which is another thing that plants really appreciate, is a moist atmosphere to work. And ultimately, this allows for agrivoltaic plants, shown here in blue, to either have equal rates of carbon uptake or equal rates of photosynthesis throughout the day, or even greater rates of carbon uptake. Why are we talking about carbon? Because this is showing how agriculture is actually something we want to keep in our landscapes, not just because of food production and identity of our communities, but because food production is scrubbing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But the farmers really care about production. And these are some of the many crops that we've been growing in an agrivoltaic setting. And all of these plus symbols represent a win in terms of agrivoltaics, in terms of increasing food production, whereas a circle is a more neutral, and the one negative here is a reduction in production. So you can see that we're finding this working well across many different types of food crops. And taking that win in our space here at Biosphere 2 up in Arizona, north of the university, or at local elementary schools where we are also doing agrivoltaics research, we've been showing the potential of agrivoltaics. But to really move forward, we got to think beyond our own borders and our own disciplines. And we're working now to develop a common set of metrics that we can deploy across space and across time, and deploy these across installations in Mexico, Kenya, and Tanzania, and East Africa, in the Arava Desert in southern Israel, in Morocco and West Africa, and including in France. And this is what one of those installations looks like here in Arizona at the Biosphere 2 facility. And you can start to see that these designs are showing up, as I mentioned, in all these different countries. And each one of these places represents a different socio-political space, like America was describing, where we have to think about the needs and the water savings and the water needs of the users. That means a lot of conversation with the elders in these communities to learn about what they're hoping for and to see what kinds of solutions agrivoltaics may or may not offer, so that we can then design the more appropriate system. Similarly, in Morocco, there's a replicate of this same kind of checkerboard of solar panels over ground cover to produce agriculture and discover these solutions. There in Mexico, south of Mexico City, there is another installation that has just finished completed in construction, but I still show this illustration here. And each one of these situations, we start to develop a slightly better version of this system. One in Mexico harvests the rainwater that comes off of these solar panels and stores it in these large tanks in the back. So we have water harvesting that then allows for a more complete closed system. We also have an established collaboration between the University of Arizona and students at UNAM and in Hermosillo and other universities across Mexico. So we already have some of this in place. Again, you see the same kind of installation in southern Israel, where they are making a little bit of a modification in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of even doing solar and creating a new bamboo-based structure. And here at Biosphere 2, because we have been spearheading this collaboration across the globe, we've now started to do some pilot studies on different crops. And so actually, the entire summer, we grew a suite of crops from Kenya, from seeds we brought in from Nairobi, so that we can test out how agrivoltaics might work in advance of being able to deploy the system there. We're well on our way towards building an international network of agrivoltaic observatories. And beyond doing this, because it's interesting and it's exciting, and part of our goals as universities to train that next generation of farmer, of engineer, of politician, of water manager, Arizona represents a potential climate future for central and southern France and for parts of Mexico. And other partners like Morocco and Israel represent our potential climate future. And so we're taking this space for time substitution to think about how solutions might work in the future, how the future might hold different opportunities or challenges as we look ahead, so that we can start to tackle them now and not wait until 2050. And so just earlier this month, we had the first National Symposium for Agrivoltaics down in Hermosillo, which is a fantastic day of learning from other academics, other practitioners, and other farmers, both indigenous and non-indigenous farmers, who stressed some of their future needs. So I hope between the people watching this call, we can start to really build out and build on the relationships we already have between Arizona and Mexico, and the relationships that our university has created with institutions around the globe, and those other connections that Mexico already holds with other institutions around the globe, to truly create a network and build on the extra capacity that exists in our different universities, whether it's on engineering technology or thinking about grazing efforts. It's all here. We have the team in place at Arizona to support these collaborations, and we hope that we can be a part of that with you. Thanks.
Excellent presentation, Greg. Thank you so much for giving us the background on agrivoltaics, and at the end, of course, extending an invitation for growing the partnership and growing the international network. I think most of us are aware when we look at, you read the newspaper and you see that there are plans and there's already many new photovoltaic installations that are going in and within the regions, potentially some of the largest in the world. And these are in very arid places that, also grow food. So I think that there's a lot of potential for this to keep growing. Thanks so much for the presentation. I know we're running a little short on time, but I do have some questions for each of you that have come in. So we'll go ahead and get started with the questions before we turn it back over to each of you for some closing thoughts. So the first question is for Sharon, and thinking about the presentation on developing an institute, and a lot of that is kind of internal to the University of Arizona, but there's also opportunities for additional partners to join and be a part of that effort. What is the source of funding really to kind of develop the institute? Have we moved that far along, or is it something that's being contemplated here at the university or within the state of Arizona?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I think, in making these recommendations, we realized that we should focus on what universities are good at, which is convening people, conducting research, collaborating with partners across society to develop solutions. So rather than specifically recommend, we think you should grow this crop here or use water in this way there, we decided to recommend the development of an institute that would bring people together. As far as funding, we identify a number of different potential sources, but we don't have any secured at this moment. So private philanthropy, federal funding agencies here in the U.S., partnerships with international organizations.
Great, great. Yeah, and that's usually how these things go, right? You have the ideas first, and then you go look for the funding. But
Yes.
I think most of us in academia are used to that. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Sharon. And for America, I'm going to switch to Spanish because the question came in Spanish, and it's a little long, but I think it's a very good question. América, sobre el punto de ética, la agricultura en la zona de Ciudad Juárez, en Chihuahua, consume el 57% de agua y genera apenas el 0.37% del Producto Interno Bruto de la ciudad. En esta dinámica se ha incrementado el cultivo de nogal, que consume 15,000 metros cúbicos por hectárea. Se ha incrementado dramáticamente en los últimos 10 años. ¿Cuál es tu opinión sobre este fenómeno en términos de productividad? La pregunta viene del doctor Gustavo Córdoba del Colef y es muy buena pregunta. Te esperamos.
Thank you so much. Well, I will practice my English if that is okay with you guys, to speak
Okay.
a little bit of both. And I know Gustavo will understand perfectly, so I think I can go with English. Yes, this question is very important. In Sonora, it's the same situation. 80% of human used water in Sonora goes to agricultural production in the whole state. And the contribution to the gross income of the state is very low and is going down and down progressively. However, the problem with the ethic question has to do with we cannot only think about economic productivity. And why is that? Because, for example, in the case of Sonora, the use of water for mining, large-scale mining industry is economically very profitable, but it's only very profitable, economically speaking. And the problem is that you have competition for use of water between communities with the large-scale mines. You have this type of extractive economies or these spaces in which a lot of extraction happens, but no economic benefit goes in an enough way for the local communities. In the case of water, there is a difference between using water for growing food for the local communities or growing something else for the market, for the global market. And the problem, and we are looking at those same things here in Sonora, is that progressively communities and ejido type of land that was used to local production, to this subsistence farming at some point, has gone to large scale production in agricultural irrigation districts for the global market. In this case, for the United States, but also for Asia, for Europe, for you name it. So for me, the ethical concern is about, and that's why I put those questions in the slide, for what you use the water. What is the purpose of water? Is to feed people, or is to accumulate the profit of that, or is to enrich certain groups and not others, or the increase in food security for one group means the decrease in food security for the other group? So I know that this may not be a complete answer, but the question is that what is the result in terms of environmental justice and food justice for the different groups that compete for that same water? I don't know I hope that helps a little bit.
No, definitely. That's a great answer, and it's there's really no easy way to look at it. It's going to be a negotiation that we're going to have to make in civil society with each other going forward.
Yes. Yeah. In a hard conversation, but we will have to face it at some point or another. We cannot escape.
That's right. That's right. And then one final question for Greg. Greg, so thinking about agrivoltaics and water, I think that the relationship between, the agricultural production and energy production is very clear. But have you started to look at involving other systems besides just agricultural and energy production? So if you think about the potential for a photovoltaic system to, to clean, make water potable for people, or for a desal system if you're in a saline environment. There are many rural parts, not only just in Mexico or the US, but around the world where they don't have access to that type of infrastructure. So is there a consideration moving forward for starting to look at adding other systems to the agrivoltaic system?
Yeah, great question, Justin. Thanks. I'd say that some of the potential falls on the same kind of conversation that America was just leading us to in terms of the size of the solar installation and who benefits from the resources of commercial versus smaller scale projects, because oftentimes large swaths of land being used for energy production don't always benefit the people in the immediate local areas. But sometimes the more community scale projects that a lot of our agrivoltaics are in do offer that opportunity for localized energy use in terms of creating a more sustainable system, whether it is for water pumping for water extraction from groundwater use from wells, whether it's desalinization at a localized scale, or things that we're exploring here in northern Arizona and some of the Dene and Hopi lands who have challenges with arsenic contamination, is water purification so that it can become potable water in the places right where you want to grow your food. Another energy use is cold storage, or some kind of post-harvest use of that energy that empowers the growers in these systems to have more negotiation power as they look to sell their products on the market.
That's a great point. Thank you so much, Greg, for the answer. And I think we're coming up on the hour here, so I'm going to turn it back to each of you very quickly for some final thoughts, and then we'll wrap up. So let's go in reverse order. Greg, any final thoughts?
Oh, great. Put me on the spot first. I'd say more than anything, it was exciting to remember just how strong our trans-border collaborations already are, and to be reminded that there are like-minded people who are definitely outside and inside of our silos that we sit in within academic universities. And so there's so much potential to reach beyond and do those engaged research and that active learning that some of our students want in meaningful ways. So thanks.
Thank you, Greg. America?
Thank you so much, Justin. Yes, there is a saying in English language that says whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over, I think it says. Well, my message is that we have more reasons for collaboration across the border than for fighting for water. And we have a long history of institutions that protect us, that make us resilient. The only thing is that we have to advance with no fear and ask the hard questions regarding how are we going to use the water in the future. So I have a lot of concepts that I could say, but I think it will be enough for now with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, America. Yeah, I think there's only hard questions left related to water in this region. Yeah. And Sharon?
Yes, thank you. I think for me, as the director of an inter and transdisciplinary research institute, really thinking about the whole systems approach that each of our speakers reflected on, and the connections among food, water, and energy, and the social and cultural and economic and ecological dimensions of all of those pieces. And I think I'm heartened by the holistic look that many of us are taking. And I think that's where we're going to really start to find the innovative solutions and the steps forward, rather than thinking of these in isolation. So thanks so much for the opportunity, and thanks to the other speakers.
Thank you, Sharon, and thanks to each of you. Thanks so much for your contributions, for your presentation today. It's a very timely topic, and we look forward to following up with the viewers of the presentation, both present and future, as this will be recorded and posted on YouTube. And as moderator, I'd like to thank my colleagues on the organizing team from Redheim, from the Network for North American Network for Human Development, and for making this possible, and of course Colef for hosting the program here. So thank you all very much. We look forward to future conversation. Take care. Cuídense mucho.
Gracias. Saludos.
Gracias.
Bye.
Yes.
Bye.